Show time. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Brent, Holland. I'm your host of Night Fright. Man, the night's upon us already, isn't it? Look at it out there. And I'm looking at the branches right now, and they're silhouetted against the night sky as the sun's fading into the west. Pretty creepy night, and we've got a great show for you tonight to keep that creep factor going. We're going to be looking tonight at the history of horror. In specific, with a great friend and great guest of mine, Kingstown Ted. Now, many of you listening right now will know that name because he hosts a terrific podcast called HorrorEtc.com, and every week, Anthony D.P. Mann and Ted, Kingstown's Ted, take you on a great journey, and they look at various aspects of horror, primarily films, and it's a fantastic, fantastic website, and it's a great way to introduce yourself to this world of horror. Now, what scares you? I'm going to give you my Skype address right away, Brent Holland Show. Just Skype me right away. Come on in the show. Let me know what scares the bejesus out of you. We're going to go to Ted right now. Kingstown Ted from Horror Etc. Welcome to the show, Ted. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, no problem at all, Brent. Thanks for welcoming me.
Very kind, my friend. Okay, let's jump in right away. The history of horror.
Oh, good. You picked a very small
I'm not quite sure. You know, I always go back, I always reference horror films, but long before there was horror films, there were books, and long before there were books, everybody sat around a campfire, I'm presuming, telling these horror stories. Now, I'm just imagining Cro-Magnon Man sitting around talking about this terrifying Tyrannosaurus Rex chasing him. But let's start, we got to start somewhere, so let's jump in early 1900s. And let's start in with a film, Nosferatu, that is always kind of not a groundbreaking one, but for me, it's the most terrifying of all the Dracula movies. You want to start there?
Okay, it's your show. I'm just a guest.
Okay.
It's fantastic. I don't know whether or not I would classify it as a starting point, but certainly it is a pillar film, iconic. It's representative of all those things that are associated with German expressionism. It's a term that's thrown around. And this film is precisely what that term means. And I think this and its predecessor, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, that's from 1920, Nosferatu 22. These films are working in the German expressionistic genre, and it's marked by specific traits and characteristics. Forced perspective being a primary one, but the use of shadows, of course. And it's interesting to me that these films that are just so massively influential are not North American. In fact, I think some of the strongest early productions in the horror genre.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Did not come out of our Hollywood system, the burgeoning Hollywood system at all.
Yeah, that's a very good point you bring up, when you look at that, especially in Nosferatu, it comes out of the legends and the lore of Eastern Europe. And, we look at the Wolfman as well. That was a little bit later. But the whole idea that there were these traditions, this lore, part of the culture of that era, works its way into film and expressionist.
Steeped in European history.
Completely.
I know that we're still within the 20th century here, but, the history of North America is much younger in comparison. So drawing on those classic stories just feels as though I think that the European filmmakers of that time were much better equipped to deliver them in a frightening way. I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't throw out just one more film from this particular time frame, that's 1920s. Golem.
Oh, yeah.
Golem had various incarnations, but 1920 is the most well-known. It is another kind of presentation of an ancient mythology. It's a Jewish lore. The concept of the animated statue that's brought to life through paper messages and brought under control. And yet, control over that kind of power is a difficult thing. And what kind of havoc can it wreak when set loose? Why, reminiscent very much so of Frankenstein.
Bingo.
We'll find, about 11 years later, So yeah, I think that these three films represent kind of the birth. 1910's Edison's original Frankenstein. It's about a 10-minute film, which was feature length at that time, but that was probably, I'm not sure, difficult subject. But the history of horror, I keep going backwards. You go into the late 1890s.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some of those groundbreaking things from Georges Méliès. Méliès. There you go. He was giving us things like La Manière du Yeah, I shouldn't be pronouncing the French titles.
That's fine. Say it in
House of the Devil.
There you go.
And these little sort of quick romps, right? And the fun thing about those are that almost all of these that survive are there on YouTube to find and just jump from one to the next.
Yeah, it's part of our culture, folks. It's part of the world's culture, without question. And in my view, it's something that brings the world together because I always get, kind of lovey-dovey on this stuff. I always say, as fans of the show know, that if it takes
sitting around a fireplace somewhere telling ghost stories, because I get them from all over the world, people write in, to stop shooting each other's butts off, then let's do that. So here. Okay, let's go. Let's dive into some of that. Now, black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, there was a whole range of horror films that kind of just all came out at once. It was like, I'm thinking of Nosferatu, of course. I'm thinking of Phantom of the Opera is another one. And here's Phantom of the Opera, folks. And we all know it primarily now as Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical. This was a silent film when it first came out. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the music behind that when it first came out, too, because they would send a score around for the organist or piano player. And this was the first form of synchronized scoring for a film. There was a whole bunch of films that came out.
There was The Hunchback of Notre Dame, of course, Nosferatu mentioned,
Piss of Wax,
The Golem, that you mentioned, and of course Frankenstein.
Don't forget Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and all the incarnations that follow. Yeah, it's a rich era.
It sure is.
I think a lot of people look at the classic horror genre and they sort of go back to the early 30s and they name Universal horror as the birth of the genre on film. But the truth of it is, the output was happening far before that. I think we've mentioned enough titles to make that point.
People investigate themselves, too.
Now, Nosferatu, you sort of broke the ice with that one, and we sort of skated right on by it. But I don't think that it should be overlooked. It's a unique piece, and not simply for the visuals. The work that was being done here by Murnau, he seemed to show this kind of early pre-understanding of how you can deliver scares, chills, frights, through this new visual medium. And so the methodology was very archaic. You couldn't really move cameras around at the time. You couldn't really work you couldn't work with sound within your film, of course. But he understood that there's power in depth of field. There's power in shadows. And simply having Count Orlok appear above the ground in an elevated window in shadow only, as a silhouette, he knew that would have a reaction, that would have power. And there's so many examples through the course of this. It's laden with that early pre-naturalistic overacting, the kind of stage acting that requires the broad gestures and the
over the top.
So, with that said, there are moments in there, and I can point to two that just come off the top of my head, and one specifically is Orlok rising from his coffin on the Demeter.
That's right. That's a classic scene, actually.
It's just simply him laying on the board. Matt Schreck is on that board. They're pulling it upright, but it has the effect of him rising upright on his own power. And secondly, I always think of the moment with the shadow. The female character's name is, I'm not remembering.
Can't remember either.
But she's prone in the bed. And how Nosferatu, how Orlok presents himself and also presents his danger is simply done through a shot of a shadowy claw, like his fingers are so elongated. This shadowy claw comes over her chest. And so you see this outline of this taloned hand over her chest, and then the shadow just grips, and she reacts. The body sort of clenches, and it's like, it's so simplistic. Yes,
but so effective. Do you think the early films were just an extension of the books? You know, what I like about a book, of course, and most people may feel the same way, is when I read a book, I get to fill in the blanks myself. I get to make up, you know, there's certain guidelines. An author will say, okay, it was raining out. But all of a sudden, you can take your mind and you can make that a thunderstorm. You can make that a slight little downpour. You can fill in the blanks pretty much. This is what I think rises to the occasion when we take a script from the early years and we allow the imagination to run loose with it. And I think you hit the nail on the head with Nosferatu, because, you know, I've seen that classic scene made so many times since then, CGI'd to hell. And it doesn't have the same effect anymore because our imagination's not in it. We're not part of the scare anymore. We can't dismiss reality enough. We're just looking at it as eye candy. Do you feel much the same way?
Well,
Steve got this practical facts to say, I'm sure I love our conversation. We wouldn't do a profile in all this.
But the imagination aspect.
That's true, you know, because there is a certain... Okay, I'll say this. You opened the show by referencing that I participate in the podcast.
Yes.
The podcast is for 7 years now already.
Hey, just let me plug it. HorrorEtc.com, HORROETC, all one word, .com.
I missed an R on there, Brent, but that's okay. We'll forgive
Did I miss an R?
Not to worry.
I can't even type. I can't spell. I can't type. Yeah. HorrorEtc.com, www.nightfrightshow. You'll find all tonight's guest information right there. Kingstown Ted is our guest.
So, over the course of all these years, we've had so many, countless hours of conversation about this, because that's really what it all is. It's just, we do it as horror fans, for horror fans. It's just a conversation about horror.
So we've talked about all this stuff, and you think that at a certain point...
Well, we're going to try it, yet it never does.
It never does, because there's a new horror film the next week or a new horror story.
There's always an aspect of
Of
something
horror.
to discuss that imagination and effects. I think that that's truth. And my point before I got sidetracked was that we've been criticized because there's been times where I've thrown it out in a casual way that, you know, with the ease of CGI.
Well, you know, the truth of it is, it's not as though it is this this very easy tool that's at our fingertips that you could just snap your fingers and create. It still takes a lot of work to generate these fantastic visuals through computer imagery. I appreciate that. But what do they say? The mother of invention is necessity. And when you don't have the capability of just constructing what you will from your imagination via a keyboard, it's kind of in your hands to create things in a very practical way. And that is what I think drives the imagination of the film production and the people and the crew that are involved. So I'm a steadfast believer in the practical effect, if for no other reason than, as you pointed out, it stimulates imagination, I think. Only because of the necessity, the resources and the limitations that are associated with it.
What I find disturbing about today's CGI effects is it doesn't engage my imagination anymore. It's delivering it to me already prepackaged. And I want a little bit of participation in a film, especially a horror film, because I want to scare the shit out of myself. Only I know... Did I just say the S word? I just dropped the S-bomb. Looks like I'll be editing this one, folks. I want to be scared, and only I know what makes me scared inside of my head. And I don't want somebody else forcing that upon me.
Well, I think it's a difficult thing from the other side of the fence as well, because as a film creator, the temptation would be difficult to resist, knowing that you're capable of, you can present this fantastic idea you have, and you're unfettered. You know, again, I don't mean to dismiss the technical work that's involved in structuring these computer images, but yet it can be done with time and money. But I have this fantastic picture in my mind of a gigantic flesh rendering demon, and it's going to have slavering jaws, and it's going to have bloody shreds of flesh dripping from its claws. And I want to show you this giant thing because it's so cool in my head. I want to present that to you. when it's done in a CGI format, when it's done as a computer projection, there's a couple pitfalls involved. Firstly, is it done in a very naturalistic way? Is it selling itself? Does it have that falseness veneer? Does it look real? Does it have that kind of wet finish to it, as you'd expect? Does it have this kind of too clean sheen? You know what I mean? So it's kind of dependent on how well it's done. But even if it's done perfectly, then it's like, well, that's a pretty cool looking image you've got there. That's a neat demon. But it's true, because what you said, in my head, that noise, that stalking element that was approaching down that misty railroad track as my character was fleeing for his life, I formulated something there, and that's not what I imagined. It's cool, but you've taken away from my own. So it's a difficult subject, and like I said, you can go down a real rabbit hole talking about this.
www.nightfrightshow.com, folks. Kingstown Ted is our guest tonight. You can find all his contact information there. Gotta urge it. You gotta listen to this Horror Etc. podcast. It's fantastic. HorrorEtc.com. If you want to ask Kingstown Ted some questions, no problem. We're accepting calls tonight. Brent Holland Show via Skype. I'll accept your contact, and you can talk to Ted right away. I'm going to give you that all night long. Brent Holland Show. Brent Holland Show, BRENT, Holland is the place for me, show. And I'll accept your contact information. Okay, let's continue with this whole idea of whether it looks real or not. I've seen some pretty phony monsters over the year. Godzilla comes to mind. Yet, in the context of the film, it still scared the bejesus out of me, because I didn't lose that disconnect between reality, and I was still inside the film. Do you feel much the same way? Like, I like an effect to push the film along as part of the story. I don't like an effect for an effect's sake.
Well, it's interesting that you throw Godzilla out as your example, because that film, that creature is really the underlying foundation of what they're doing. Now, there's a lot more depth to 1954's Gojira, or however you pronounce it, than the big rubber monster. And I know that, and I think most people can appreciate that. And yet, front and center, we have a giant stomping lizard, because it's a really cool thing, and it's an unknown image, and it's something that is a really great representation of the metaphor we want to share with you. So there he is. It's hard to look around him, but I think what makes Gojira, I'm going to stop. All right, I'm going to just stop with the proper pronunciations. Godzilla.
I think you're doing just fine, buddy. I think you're doing just
dark
fine.
Themes that are present in the film, and for those that maybe haven't checked out that original, Godzilla we all know and love, or at least know, there is this 1954 black and white first outing, and it is unique unto itself. It's very different from the franchise that followed. It and its sequel kind of are apart from the rest. Firstly, it's black and white. And secondly, it does not apologize for its dark themes whatsoever. There's very dark moments in it. Yeah, he's stomping around Tokyo. He's crushing buildings, constructs, people beneath him. And, of course, it's all a gigantic metaphor of the nuclear age and the havoc that it has wreaked upon this country. But there's a specific shot, a scene in that movie that it was always stuck with me, and it has to do with the family that's huddling in the corner, at the absolute mercy of this behemoth. And if I'm not mistaken, the mother is singing to the children, trying to pacify them in the moment before death. Now, man, there is nothing, that is very dark. There is nothing apologetic about that scene that says, this is death incarnate. Yes, it's a giant lumbering man in a costume, but it's effective nonetheless.
I agree with you completely. Did you see Godzilla as some kind of an extension, if you will? We're talking about people in costumes and stuff. King Kong comes to mind.
Okay.
Right away, King Kong. Now,
sure.
That's a classic.
The animatronic marvel.
Well, it scared the bejesus out of me once again, because when I look at it now, okay, I know it's animatronic, and I know it's not real and everything. But at the time,
I was allowing that to happen because I wanted to be involved in that film. I wanted to be scared. I wanted to identify with the running and somebody chasing me and the insanity of it all. Just saying.
I don't know whether I classify King Kong as a frightening film to me. I never really saw it that way. It's an adventure movie to me. Notably the dinosaurs and the lost spider chasm scene, these sequences, climbing the building, the fighting the planes, all this stuff. Even attacking Kong to bring him down with their smoke grenades. It was an action movie or an adventure movie. There's horrific aspects to it, but I don't think it ever really dwelled upon horrific themes necessarily. If I could just pull on that one little thread that's hanging there and bring us back to our films of yesteryear. We were muddling around in the 20s there for a bit. Mm-hmm. And the idea of effects and how they can accomplish so much, I think it's represented well in Phantom of the Opera. You brought it up, and there's been many incarnations, but the most famous, I think, is 1925's Lon Chaney Sr.'s Phantom of the Opera, which not only brought about new innovations with music and composition, but also the idea that they color tinted, so they actually matched various sequences with color tinting, which was a new concept as well. But in this film, what we see, the massive reveal is made, and my co-host Anthony, he does this so well. He's got, I think he has the source material memorized, but he knows all the lines, and it's "Look upon my wretched accursedness," it's when he does the big reveal and everything, and he's there front and center in that frame, and what you're seeing is this man. He's an actor, but his face is so contorted and twisted and nightmarish, done with simple wires, spirit gum pulling on the flesh, applications to build up various parts of the face, and it's not just those simple techniques, it's the way the shadows are thrown against him, and it's that title card at just the right moment. It's the rising sound of the musical score that's accompanying it. It is a very powerful scene. Is it going to scare anybody in 2014? Probably not. But I think I don't know. I speak from my own perspective. I have a definite appreciation for these films of yesteryear and kind of the roads they carved. And I don't think that we get to some of the masked serial killers such as the Jason Voorhees, the Mike Myers, the Freddy Kruegers of the world without the groundwork laid down by a film like Phantom of the Opera.
That's very, innovative because I had never thought of that aspect of it before. What's really cool is the fact that he made all that makeup himself.
So the legend goes.
And that was, who played the character? Lon Chaney. He also played the Hunchback of Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Quasimodo.
Quasimodo.
And in that one, it was a physical contortion. It's interesting because he did so many movies. And my experience with his catalog isn't so deep, but I've enjoyed a lot of there's one called The Unknown, and I'll just briefly mention it. The Unknown, the story is incredibly simple. I think it's 1927 at the tail end of the silent era. In this, he plays a circus man, and he has a love affair with a circus woman. There's a strong man, and there's a romantic triangle. And the irony is that he loves her, she loves him, but she cannot abide the touch of a man. It's almost like fairy tale level of depth. She cannot abide the touch of a man. His resolution to this is to have his arms removed. Brent, sorry. To have his arms removed. It's drastic. But again, think of a grim fairy tale, and that's where we're working. So in terms of storytelling, he has his arms removed. It's grotesque. But what we have is the actor Lon Chaney Sr. now, with his arms pinned to his body, no longer of use, and all the things that he's capable of pulling off in this manner, it's astonishing. Quasimodo, he's simply bent over. Yes, he's hunched himself in a very literal way. And just seeing him jollying around on the precipice of Notre Dame, and you think, wow, that is the main actor. That's a guy. That's not a stunt guy. That's him, and he's doing that, and it's really impressive to look at.
Pretty amazing movie craft. Incredible stuff. Kingstown Ted is our guest tonight, folks. We're looking at the history of horror. Yeah, we're using the medium of film to take us through this little journey together. But definitely, folks, we're open to, if you've got a scary book out there, there's Shining has been re-released in a book format. Stephen King, of course, is the king of that horror genre, without question. If you've got something like that you want to discuss with Kingstown Ted, he is an expert.
Stop it now. So,
go ahead, buddy.
If we're going to talk history of horror, Brent, I don't really know where you wanted to go with this. The truth of it is, this is what you might classify as an impromptu show. Because we talked about this briefly, we had something else in mind, and then kind of at the last minute we switched up. We said, let's do the history of horror. And you click the button, and here we are. So we're going to let it freeform and see where we go. Is that the plan?
That is the plan, because originally, folks, as fans of this show will know, I've been plugging for the past month or so, we have the opening of a score of a movie that I've scored called Phantom of the Opera. And originally we were supposed to have the director of that particular film on, Anthony D.P. Mann.
I know him.
You know him, who just happens to be Ted's co-host on Horror Etc. podcast. But Anthony is up to his neck trying to get technical things resolved for the opening for tomorrow night, and he had to cancel virtually 10 minutes before the show. So he's a super trooper. If he gets finished in time, and that could be him ringing right now, folks, as we speak, we can certainly get him on the show. And we can talk about Phantom. That's what we're supposed to do, is focus on the history of Phantom. Then I just kind of opened up the whole thing to engage all of horror, because what takes place in Phantom kind of takes place in a lot of other movies. These are all classic movies. And Kingstown Ted has been glorious enough to join us in a super trooper, Brent Holland show. If you want to join in the conversation, you are all welcome. And ask Kingstown Ted some questions. Let's stick with Phantom for a second.
Sure.
Andrew Lloyd Webber kind of put it back on the map with the musical.
I'll say.
Have you seen the musical?
Several times.
What do you think? Is there significant differences, significant similarities between the two?
Oh, well, it is really its own entity, to be honest. Now, of course, the original written work goes back a long time. And so, I mean, when you're going back to that source material, there's going to be differentials between what they're presenting on a Broadway versus the written work versus the various film incarnations. I do recall we did this as a subject some time ago, and we ran through, 1962. Hammer tackled it. 1982, there was a television adaptation. There's all these different versions. 2004, I believe, was the year that Gerard Butler tackled the Andrew Lloyd Webber Broadway film as a film adaptation. So it's a crazy thing. In terms of the actual story itself, Phantom of the Opera, what works for me, because I'm not generally a musical theater guy at all, I don't really have an appreciation for it, generally speaking, but there's something about this musical work, this composition. Andrew Lloyd Webber did great things, and it's just this kind of really fun, romantic approach to a very gothic and dark, macabre story. I wanted to ask you, Brent. Now, we're going to move into the 30s, because if you're going to tackle history of horror, we've got to get to Universal Horror. And Universal Horror is kind of like the launching pad for North American cinematic genre. The studio of Laemmle presented two films within a scant few months of one another. They were Dracula and Frankenstein. Now, Todd Brownings's Dracula is an interesting subject because, of course, it's the classic, the best known, but it is a very stagey film presentation. It is a very dry film in retrospect, to be perfectly honest. James Whale, I feel, is a much more dynamic approach in Frankenstein from 1931. But these two films paired together basically blew open the doors, because what Carl Laemmle saw was, whoa, people are turning out in droves for this stuff. I'm not big on horror, but keep it coming, because people are buying tickets, and this is insane. And so, of course, you get the floodgates open. You get the franchises that follow, installment after installment after installment. 10 years later, The Wolfman jumps into the fray, and we get a whole new feature film franchise happening. Then we did the crossovers begin, and it carries on all the way through, you could arguably say, into 1950s, Creature from the Black Lagoon is probably the last incarnation, the new Creature installment in Universal's catalog. But I got to ask you, I think most people are aware of these titles, but which one of these resonates with you?
Dracula.
Dracula is the one?
Without hesitation, that movie still, I love Nosferatu, and I really do. That's my scariest movie of all time. But there's something about Dracula that just must be his darn eyes. You know when they show that scene of his eyes?
Well, now you're talking about Bela Lugosi.
Absolutely. And to me, he's my ultimate Dracula. He will always be Dracula for me. A friend of mine was just telling me a story, actually, where Universal kept on using Bela Lugosi's image long after he passed away, right into the 50s. And Bela Lugosi Jr. started a lawsuit against Universal. But as it turns out, he lost, which is a darn shame, but he lost because Bela Lugosi was hired as not a contractor, but as an employee. So there it is. And Kingstown Ted is going to make a comment right now. Aren't you? So I can't read.
We're disrupted here. We had a phone call interruption, so I'm all thrown off here. I guess
he is, by the way. I think he's going to definitely speak.
Okay. So the reason why I challenged Dracula, and this is only a personal opinion, of course, but sadly, Bela is not in the film a great deal. The opening sequence, the first act really is the strength of 1931's Dracula because of its gothic locale, the Carpathian Mountains, and the dusty mansion of Transylvania.
Yeah, that's what I loved.
And all of that, but you get Bela walking Harker through the castle. You have him sort of with these strange monologues. Listen to them, the children of the night, and all this. This is fantastic stuff. The unfortunate part is that when we return to London,
his voice is freaking me out.
When we return back to England, things really do slow down. And Bella's not there much. He only makes a scant few appearances, and it becomes a drawing room story at this point. We're just sat around in the drawing room, and thankfully we have a great Van Helsing, but I don't know. I think Todd Browning's seminal work, in my opinion, is Freaks from 1833, the film that effectively ended his career, but is a fantastic experience, lambasted because of the use of real-life circus sideshow performers. But I think that there's real heart to the story that's told there, and it is such a unique piece of cinematic history, horror or non.
Agreed. Agreed. But something about Dracula, perhaps because Bella's not in it as much. I don't need to see him. I just know that he's ever present, that he's kind of controlling the space, if you will. And that's something I learned in theater. Who's controlling the space at any given time? And how do you work that into the narrative? And, the one part I didn't like, of course, was that silly, silly bat. They could have left that out. That was ridiculous. And I think it did a disservice to the movie in the long run. But there's something, like you said, about that gothic space with the dust and the cobwebs, and I don't think that's been recaptured since.
Well, I mean, it feels like a tomb. It's actually effectively pulling off the underlying truth of it is that this is a house of death. This is a creature, a foul creature, and I've always, the vampire genre, a subgenre unto itself, is maligned, I'd say, because of the incarnations it has taken, specifically in the modern era. The romanticized presentation of the vampire is not my bag. But there's something about, I'm jumping around, but in 1979, Werner Herzog remade Nosferatu, and it is a very haunting film. It's it's imagery driven, and it is Klaus Kinski in the lead role as Orlok that really sells this thing. He presents the character as this disease-ridden creature, very animalistic, and the idea of the vampire as a rodent, as vermin, that's how I associate with the vampire mythology. Dracula is death, and you can just imagine the stench of death that comes off of him. Even though he's almost ethereal, he is vermin. And how do we react when we see rats? You're walking downtown, and it's at night, and you walk by dumpsters or garbage bags left on the street, and what do you see? These rats scurrying about, and how do you react? It's always negative. It's always, and you just take a step to the side away. And that's how vampires work best to me. They are disgusting creatures.
Agreed. Now, are they the spawn of Satan? That's my favorite vampires, when they're the spawn of Satan.
The demonic elements.
I don't want to feel sorry for these guys. I really don't.
Well, I think it's best that the origination of the vampiric effect is left best ambiguous. I don't want to know its origin. I don't want to know how it began or what perpetrates it. But it's a truth. And it is a scourge, and it is something to combat. And that's why Van Helsing is such a strong and brave character, in that when confronted with vermin, he takes it head on. Now, this is perhaps getting deeper into 1931's presentation than you maybe necessarily need to get. But I think that all those layers are there. And it's a shame that too often classic films of yesteryear, the black and white, dusty old flicks, are so often overlooked. It's a shame, because I think that there's real value to have there. There's real appreciation to take from what they presented and what they were setting up to come.
It's funny, I'm going to bring a different style of film in. I had tried to introduce The Dirty Dozen to a modern audience, a kid's audience. And when I was growing up, that was one of my all-time favorite movies. Now, I haven't tried to do this with a horror film, but this analogy will work just as well. They were looking at the film differently than I had. I was looking at the character interaction and the story. Everything else was just gloss, if you will. This little guy was looking at the gloss and not the story and not the interaction with the characters. If I draw an analogy from the early films that we were just talking about, because they lacked the resources, because they lacked the technical prowess to actually achieve these wonderful CGI effects, have we gone full circle where the story has become secondary now, and it's just gloss that we're looking at? Is that today's audience?
Well, if we're going to fast forward to the modern times, I think that what has happened is that there's been a split. It's sort of branched into a fork. As a fan, as an audience member, this is the way I read it, is there's two approaches to filmmaking happening. One is it is an industry, and it is profit driven. And there is a specific template and a formula to how you produce a quote-unquote horror film. There are those key elements that you sew into specific ways, and you just sort of jumble up the non-specific elements, and you produce it. And preferably you produce it with a rating of PG-13 in order to maximize the potential box office returns. It generates your tidy profit, and you move on, and it's forgotten, and nobody's discussing it 20 years down the road, because all it was a product. Now, that might sound dismissive, but that is a truth. I think there's another road, though, that is there. And sometimes it's difficult to navigate, but that is where you have truth, heart, intent, creativity, drive, vision. All these things are being delivered. And these are the people that often have to struggle a lot more to get these things made. They fall outside the template sometimes. They work outside the box. They're playing with conventions. They're trying to construct new and innovative ways to scare. Sometimes they dismiss, partially because it's resource-driven. They simply don't have the resources, the budget at the time to construct everything in an animated, computer image-generated way. So often, because of those restrictions, those boundaries, they will omit presenting the frightening elements, in which, turns out, that can often be the more successful path to take. Because now, as we started out with this discussion, now your brain is working, now your imagination's filling in certain gaps. The term, I think, is pareidolia, where your brain will formulate images on its own in order to create form. The brain is not wired to allow for chaos. Everything is meant to be ordered, so your brain will attempt to do that. And that's where you get images that people will see, such as the burnt piece of toast, where people will lay claim that I see the Virgin Mary in that pattern. Well, maybe not, but your brain sees, and as soon as you say that, and you point out certain features that your brain has seen, that's the Virgin Mary you see, and this is the chin, and this is the eye, and this is, you see the cloak here, and it's like, I guess, and now you're seeing it too, but initially your brain constructed that image. Similarly, when you're working with low-budget feature films, horror genre films with limitations that require you to work a little harder as an audience member, now your brain, even maybe your lizard brain underneath it all, is working, and it's making you unnerved and uneasy, and you're not entirely sure why. It's simply because the lack, the unknown, the presentation of unknown is making you more afraid. And so that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, there's the very polished, very formulaic, very easy and accessible horror that you may see, enjoy, take that roller coaster ride, get off, and forget about. And then there's the others out there that really do work to have an effect on the audience. So those specific hidden gems, that's what I'm forever in search of.
You watch horror films over and over and over again, I'm thinking, especially the classics.
Absolutely.
But yet you know the scary parts are coming up.
Yes.
How come?
How come I rewatch them?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. So, there's lots of different theories on this. You go back to, is it 1963's The Haunting, the Robert Wise classic?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's driven by the construct of a study of fear. A psychological study that is examining the fear response and what drives it, right? And it's sewing that into its film. It's sewing that into its storytelling in an interesting way. So it makes you think about what is it that makes us afraid and what is it that works. Well, there's lots of different theories to this.
10 minutes is coming.
Let me throw a quote at you, okay?
Oh, sure.
I'm stumbling here. I'm having trouble. There's phones ringing. There's stuff going on. Here's the quote.
Show tonight, folks. Ted, you had mentioned Frankenstein before, and there was just a new release of Frankenstein, and I was toying with going to see it. And it bombed, completely bombed.
I, Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Well, deservedly so. That is a good demonstration of an example of what I was referring to.
That's why I thought of it right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not engaged at all with this thing. It's just...
Well, that's not attempting to frighten in any way, I would think.
No, it's just overload, isn't it? Sensory overload, I think.
Yeah.
There's no story. The story's gone.
Okay. A couple things I want to raise. I don't have a real clean answer for you as to why I seek out films that I have all the scare moments are known ahead of time. Let's use The Exorcist. The Exorcist is probably one of those films I've seen more than any other. There are certain moments that you know and you're going to react to. One of them, as an example, is Reagan spinning her head around. It's crazy, man. Like every single time her head spins around and I get unnerved. Every single time. And it's not about knowing what's coming. It's not about knowing that it's going to happen. It's your response to what you're seeing. And because that dopamine or endorphins or whatever chemical is pumping as a result of your lizard brain reacting to what it's seeing, yeah, I'll go for that again. That was crazy, man. Like, I love feeling that way, knowing that I'm in the safety of my living room and on the comfort of my couch. And that's the whole horror film experience, is feeling that rush within a safe environment. The quote I wanted to throw at you, though, because I think that this is a classic line that kind of embodies what it is that we all seek out. It comes from H.P. Lovecraft, master of the weird literature, a great author, maybe not the best man, but a fantastic writer. The quote is this: "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. The oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." So that element, that specific single element, is what drives horror in whatever medium you choose, whether it be literature, song, art, or film. The unknown is what makes you unnerved, and when that can be presented well, that's when it's most effective. Frankenstein is not attempting to give you the unknown. It's not attempting to generate that fear response through atmosphere and through dread. It's simply throwing a lot of really cool visuals at you. So I always gravitate to the former.
Horror films better in 3D, or are they better
3D? Oh, God.
Oh, I think I've just touched a nerve here, folks. Kingstown Ted is our guest tonight, by the way, if you're just joining us. We're talking about the history of horror. We're using film right now as a medium, but certainly, if there's books out there, if there's something out there that you find terrifying, give us a call. Brent, Holland Show. I'll put you right in contact with Kingstown Ted. He has a wonderful podcast with a guest that's coming. He's on his way. Anthony G.P. Mann, who's also the director of a great horror film that I just scored called Phantom of the Opera. And it's in the classic sense of the old horror film, and it will scare this Easter stuffing right out of you without question. www.nightfrightshow.com. That'll take you right to a place where you can hook up to Horror Etc's podcast. Back to Kingstown Ted. So, 3D. I touched on it.
Oh, 3D? I don't have any specific animosity toward 3D. I just don't feel as though that $3 surcharge is warranted most of the time. There are spectacle pieces that I think exemplify what it's capable of doing. Most recently, Gravity would be the example I'd throw out. Now, it's limited to the confines of the theaterplex because you need to have that gigantic screen. You need to have the projection in 3D. You need to have everything working to really get immersed. But when everything does work, it's pretty fantastic. Now, that's a long shot away from the post-converted, $3 surcharge grab that you get too many times. In horror specifically, it's kind of it can be kitschy. The early 80s had a bit of a revival. The 50s, again, 3D worked in the horror genre. That's kind of where these 3D presentations were most prominent. A few years back when 3D was rising again, in 2010, I think it was, My Bloody Valentine was in 3D. And what did they do with it? Well, they threw that pickaxe right at the screen, right? I mean, there's nothing really suspenseful about what they're doing with it, but they're going to play with it and have fun. And if you're doing it right, it can work.
I agree completely. We've got a call coming in from Nevada. How you doing?
Hey, Brent, Bill and Angela, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for calling in.
Well, I tell you, I apologize. I was out, it's opening day of fishing in the Sierras, and I was packing up the Bronco, and time got away from me, so I just ran in here, and I haven't even had a chance to listen to you guys, so I just wanted to get on. So I'll just let the show go on, and if I have a question, I certainly will let you know. I apologize for interrupting.
No, you're not interrupting at all. We're talking about the history of horror. We're using film as a medium for that.
Hi, Bill.
Hi. We're doing Phantom of the Opera? Is that what we're doing?
We're talking about Phantom of the Opera or any horror, but sure.
Oh, okay. All right. I had seen it. I had seen the original play in New York some time ago, and then they brought it to Los Angeles. And the main actor for the first 5 weeks played the Phantom in Los Angeles, and I didn't see him in New York. And everybody was saying it's a whole different experience, and I couldn't figure that out because when I saw it in New York, it was such an unbelievable performance, and then when it came to Los Angeles, and again the main guy did it, it was a whole different experience. So that's all I can say about that.
What's your favorite horror film, Bill? What scares you the most?
My favorite horror film?
Yeah.
I've never been much into horror, but I would probably The Exorcist, I guess. all the hype it had and everything, for something that wasn't too much horror, but it was very dramatic and it was very scary. It was Wait Until Dark. I can't think. Alan Arkin and anyway, but I guess The Exorcist.
The Exorcist, yeah, that seems... How about you folks out there listening right now? What's your favorite horror film? What scares you the most in the dark? Brent, Holland, show. I'll put you right online. You can tell us your favorite horror film. You can be speaking with Kingstown Ted. Kingstown Ted, of course, does a Horror Etc. podcast, horroretc.com, with Anthony D.P. Mann, and who should be here in the next hour. He's going to tell us all about Phantom of the Opera and directing it and acting in it. And we're talking about everything horror tonight.
Just to jump in there, Brent, sure. Wait Until Dark is a fantastic title to throw out there. It's a late 60s entry, and the lead actress there, Audrey Hepburn, plays a recently blinded woman. And the concept of the film is she's basically terrorized in her home by these thugs, these ruffians that come in, led by Alan Arkin. And Richard Crenna, very young Richard Crenna as well, is in there. I just recently discovered that one a few years ago, and I would also recommend Wait Until Dark. It's a fun one.
Yeah, if I could interject, when it first came out, we all went to see it, and there is a point in the movie, and I won't spoil it for Brent, but when somebody jumps at somebody and somebody thinks that somebody's dead, and the entire theater just screamed. It was so it was done very, very well. Richard Crenna always was a great actor and played great parts, and it was just a great ensemble. It was just one of those great little cult films.
It's funny. I was just talking about. What's the name of that? The Dirty Dozen, and of course Richard Crenna was in that movie as well. What I wanted to bring up was isolation plays a big part in a lot of horror films. Now, going back to the movie we were just discussing, do you think the fact that she was blind and isolated in her own mind, if you will, did that play some kind of role in the terror?
Well, isolation is a primary characteristic of the horror genre, I think. Of course, it speaks to a helplessness, and that's what you're seeking out. It's one of those things that I think is in the modern era. Filmmakers, I think, have to struggle a little bit more to accomplish this sense of isolation. Of course, there's always going to be the cabin in the woods, things go wrong. Camping trip, things go wrong. At sea, something goes wrong. But the through line of it all is that you've got a small group of characters that are in a spot that they can't leave. And there's an outside threat. Sometimes you can flip it around a little bit and have the threat be within, much like The Thing. And, how do you deal with it? But isolation in the current era is difficult because we are all connected. It's a global village, and we've all got these wonderful contraptions in our pocket that... There goes one right now.
It goes off whenever you...
So yeah, with the cell phone, it is one of those things that's almost become it's a fun cliche now, and you can find these compilation clips on YouTube that poke fun at it, where it's, how do we get rid of the cell phone in a horror film? And there's all various manner of means. Battery's dead. No reception. There's no signal. Or it's taken, or it's damaged, or something or other. But we got to get those damn cell phones out of the movie for these people to be isolated to start down our road of terror.
Absolutely. Folks, you can tell Anthony's a musician. That's him on the cell phone. He has arrived at the Studio Kingston. And he's downstairs waiting for us. We're about to start our break. And we'll be back in 6 minutes. So stick with us, folks. Here comes the music. 6-minute break. We'll be back real soon. Stick with us tonight.
Holy shit. Is that him?
Yeah.
Why is he bringing so...
Oh, we got a little bit of a hiccup, I think. We got Kingstown. There you go. Kingstown. You want to try your microphone, guys?
How's it going?
Hooray! Kingstown Ted. And Anthony D.P. Mann.
Hey, I finally made it onto the show. Now, I know you. You and I have crossed paths before. We kind of do this like once a week, and of course, Mr. Brent Holland.
I'm going to turn my mic off. I think folks will just let these guys go.
Hey, Brent.
Yeah, hi, Bill.
Hi. You're on the air.
Thanks.
And your mic's on.
And Bill's joining us all the way from Nevada, just north of Nevada, and I always forget where you are. You want to tell us where you are?
Well, Lake Tahoe.
Lake Tahoe, duh.
And it snowed 3 inches last night, and it's snowing right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God! It's like 60 degrees here, Bill. When are you coming to Canada and get out of that crazy weather in the United States?
Brent, I just want you to know your microphone is a little weird.
My microphone, so am I. That's okay. It was sound like, is it echoing a little bit?
No, you're like you sound like you're in a tunnel.
A tunnel. Okay.
Yeah.
How about now? Is that a little bit better?
Not like you're usually close to the mic. No.
All right. I'll go like this. How's that? Got it?
Well, I'm having problems hearing you, but it's just letting you know.
Anyway, can you hear me?
Let's see.
Oh,
Hello?
Every night at 5 o'clock.
And that's a little better, I guess.
That's better. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. And Bill's joining us as well, and we're talking about the history of horror. We're going to condense it all into 55 minutes. I'm going to go back to Ted now, and Kingstown Ted. Ted, let's continue where we left off just before the break. And we were starting to talk about 3D, whether 3D actually works better for horror, worse for horror. Some people say they like the blood and gore coming at you. Some people say, nah, it just takes out of the reality of the movie. How do you guys feel? Ted?
Well, I mean, as I said, 3D in horror is something that's, I think, intended best used for kitsch value. I think it's a really useful way to deliver true scares. But in terms of the history of horror, we're going to go crazy with trying to chronologically progress. I think that it was a great launching pad to get into, the early underpinnings of the genre, the classic films that we know and love. And of course, I think we should save the subsequent eras for future installments, Brent. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 of this discussion. How about that? But I felt like during that break it came to mind, we'd be very remiss to not at least name drop a couple things that we overlooked, and that's the Mummy films, of course, specifically. And The Invisible Man, why not?
Oh, of course.
Claude Rains' Invisible Man.
Incredible Shrinking Man, too.
We threw out a bunch of stuff there from the Universal era and 30s and as a decade, but
It sounds like I missed the best part of the program already. Okay, well,
we're Hammer right now.
Okay, well, I can help with Hammer, absolutely. But just my own 2 cents on the Universal films, because I came to the Universal films at a very, very young age, and my gateway drug was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is the perfect way to introduce anybody to these films, because what you're getting the humor element that ropes you in with Abbott and Costello up to their hijinks. But then you introduce Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and Glenn Strange as the Frankenstein monster. Lon Chaney Jr. is back as the Wolfman. That's a fantastic film, and that was my first introduction to the Universals. And then I wanted to go back and I wanted to discover Dracula and Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein. I remember actually staying up late till 3:30 in the morning to catch I was in grade 3 at the time. I stayed up late without my parents knowing to catch a 3:30 a.m. viewing on television of the original Dracula, the Todd Browning film with Lugosi, and just being enraptured. My stepfather, who worked overnights, came home that morning and he found me sitting in front of the TV, rewatching it on video because I had to tape it right, wearing a vinyl vampire cape with vampire fangs in my mouth. So those movies are wonderful. And again, I do apologize for jumping into the discussion halfway through, but I think if you want to introduce anybody, I know Ted's a great father. He's got a couple of great kids, and he's slowly introducing them to the world of horror. I think the Universal films make for the perfect gateway drug into this genre.
Anthony, among other things, I think I have to credit you now with clairvoyance, because that was exactly one of my questions I was going to pitch over to Ted. Ted, as a father, how do you discern what the kids can watch and which they can't? That must be a tough call.
Oh, God. Brent, now, we're going to have to... So, these are pretty broad subjects you're throwing out there, like, mainstream media and what it presents to the youth of today, and and how that affects their emotional responses and their premature maturities and all this stuff. You got to keep it simple. I think that kids today can handle a lot more than we give them credit for. And this whole business of exposing children to the improper things, I think it all is on a case-by-case basis. And I think that a properly involved and interested parent can guide their kids into the horror genre very safely, very carefully, and, open them up to this wonderful subgenre that we all know and love.
Now, I think that's a very, very noble cause, but I think that most of us probably were introduced to horror by accident behind our parents' back. Now, I can remember probably my earliest encounter with horror, and it's funny because this comes back to haunt me in a good way. Pardon the pun. I remember being 4 years old and waking up in the middle of the night, and my mother always loved horror films. And I walked into the den. She was watching a movie. Again, it was about 3:30 in the morning, the witching hour. And I walked in, and it was a pivotal scene in a movie called The Changeling, which, for your listeners out there, 1981, it's a Canadian and American co-production starring George C. Scott. It's about a haunted house that was shot partially in Canada. And this is, without a doubt, the finest haunted house movie ever made. I love The Haunting, the Robert Wise film. I love The Uninvited. These are wonderful films, but The Changeling, in my opinion, is the greatest haunted house film of all time, and it became my personal favorite film of all time. But I didn't know this when I was 4. And walking in by accident into the den during what I'll only say is the wheelchair scene. I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but there's a wheelchair scene.
And I have to interrupt you. What kind of God at the age of 4 were you doing up at 3:30?
I probably had to pee.
Okay, good answer.
I might actually stop this program, actually, so I can go and take a tinkle. But, that had a wonderful impact on my life. So then fast forward a year and a half later, and you have to understand, I have great parents. I had a great upbringing. My mother, who is a fan of the horror genre, was training to be a nun. She was actually in a convent, and she was getting ready to take her vows when she discovered this whole other side of life. But she loved horror films. But she was careful with what I watched. But being the mischievous young lad that I was, I would seek out these things. I remember specifically, it was 1983. Boy, I remember back in the day when I was a boy. It was 1983. And it was
wore an onion on our belts, which was the fashion at the time.
I used to walk 25 miles in the snow. What? Yes. So I remember.
Now, just let me say, folks, if you're enjoying these guys go back and forth, horror.etc.com, they have a weekly podcast. You're going to love it.
I'm going to suggest if you're enjoying these guys going back and forth, you should probably stop listening to this program and go have a visit, set up an appointment with a competent psychologist. But in the absence of that, going back to, it was 1983, it was New Year's Eve, and a whole bunch of parents from school, all the I was five at this time. All the kids kind of, were all the kids who were friends. Their parents got to know each other, and they would get together. This was riveting. They would get together and play Trivial Pursuit, which might be exciting in the moment, but when you're a child, it's probably the most dread.
By the way, folks.
What?
Canadian invention.
Montreal Gazette. That's right. There were a couple of journalists from the Gazette actually created it. So. New Year's Eve, 1983. It's just before the ball drops, and the parents are upstairs playing Trivial Pursuit. The kids are watching movies downstairs, like Superman 2 had just hit. We were watching that, and we were probably watching The Last Unicorn, the cartoon. And the movies end. Well, we'll throw on something else. What do the parents have in the collection?
Oh boy!
Oh, what's this movie? It's The Exorcist. Exorcist. So, we couldn't even pronounce it at the time, but we thought it was an exercise tape at first. So everybody wanted to see Jane Fonda hopping around with steel buns. But lo and behold, we put on this film. And I'll tell you, that defines my life right there. That's the defining moment of my life. When you're introduced to The Exorcist at 5 and change. Of course, when the parents found out, they were livid. But we watched the whole thing.
You're kidding.
And no, that stuck with me. Here
the
we are.
deed was done at that point.
The deed was done 31 years later, and it's
was writ.
it's had a lasting impact.
If you came in and the two kids are watching The Exorcist,
I sit down with them. Yes, absolutely. And I don't say listen, I don't say that in a flippant manner. I would think, well, if I just shut this down and dismiss them outright, what's that communicating to them? Well, I'll see this. What is this? This forbidden fruit I must seek out. No. You sit down with them and you say, okay, I'll tell you what this is about. This is a movie that's going to scare the pants off you. Trust me on that. But I'll be here with you. And don't forget,
That's a father film.
everybody is an actor. Do you know what acting is about? Well, it's about pretending. So watch this part here that's going to come up, because a head is going to spin around, and it is crazy.
Let me tell you
now,
something.
The Exorcist,
Ted.
that particular title, there are problematic moments that go beyond simply the visual scares.
I
They
know
involve
how-
the crucifix
Yeah.
and that whole sequence. I'd be uncomfortable with
Come
that,
on.
but
I know how this movie was made. I know what Dick Smith did. Every time I sit down to watch this, the moment it starts up, when you have tubular bells play,
Yes.
you know,
Mike Oldfield.
yeah, Mike Oldfield, exactly. I'm done for, because I'm absorbed into it. You know, it's that great story. It's that great atmosphere. It's that great those great performances, Lee J. Cobb and Ellen Burstyn and of course Linda Blair, that just ropes you in. Jason Miller, and then you're hooked. So I
Would
think
you let kids watch it?
what?
Would you let kids at 5 watch
I should never be allowed.
Anthony has no responsibility.
No. I could be the worst parent in the world. Are you kidding me?
So you would.
Well, I wouldn't let my kids go to sleep until they've watched their horror films. No.
At 3:30 in the morning.
Well,
School.
I would be. Are you kidding? I'd be a terrible parent, because I love impressionable minds, and I think that any performing artist loves to encounter people with with impressionable minds. So to give me access to children, I would terrify them. I'd creep into the room at 3 a.m. dressed as Count Dracula and stand at the bed and rig up some glowy eyes and everything. Oh no, yeah, I should never have kids.
My God. Okay, you're a director. You're a very famous director in Canada, and so
I appreciate that.
Phantom of the Opera,
Yes.
which I scored, and we've got the opening next tomorrow night. What I want to ask you is,
Yeah.
there is a kid in it.
There is, yeah.
Did you give guidelines to the parents?
Well, what's wonderful is
How did you deal with it? Because he's only a young little guy.
he's like 10 or 11 now. With Declan Spellman, this is the second film. I love this kid. I think he's fantastic. Do you know he's probably made more as an actor than anybody else in the cast?
Really?
He really has. He's done like yogurt commercials and things, and you make good money in cultured milk products, apparently.
There's an old joke. What's the difference between, I shouldn't say this, a particular city in the northern part of Ontario that I was in for 3.5 years. What's the difference between that particular city and a bowl of yogurt?
I give up.
You're going to find far more culture in
The yogurt, yeah. Okay, well, listen, that kid, though, I mean, his family loves horror films, and he's seen a few. He's seen a few, and he loved it. When I told him what I wanted, I said, now you're going to be the creepy ghost kid. This is in Ghost Keepers. He knew right away what I wanted, and he knew exactly what to get. I mean, horror films have become so much a part of modern culture. Back when Ted and I were younger, and back when you were younger too, Brent, a long time ago. But back in those days, I mean, the horror genre was relegated to to teenagers, and it was the type of thing that you did in a basement. You watched these movies with your creepy little friends, and now because of the internet, of course, and studios are always slow to jump on the bandwagon, but they realize now that horror is mainstream. It is the most profitable genre film, and that is a statistic. That is a fact that horror films make more than any other.
What were the guidelines you gave the parents?
What do you mean?
For the little guy. You just didn't throw him into it. I know you told people what wanted, but...
Sure. And I was kind of rambling. I'll just wrap up what I was trying to get at there was that, horror films are...
question in 10 in just a second.
Well, horror films are so common now, but everybody is familiar with them. Everybody knows the formula. And this kid knew exactly what to give me without having to rehearse or coach him, and I thought that was wonderful.
Scared me, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's scared you twice. Yeah. Well, ghost kids are the scariest.
First, you see all the various props and all the pieces of latex and all the different mechanisms that are at play to pull off the illusion. Well, I don't think that it has any effect at that point.
Interesting.
That said, I would never leave my children alone with Anthony Mann. But that's a whole other discussion.
And rightly so.
www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guests. I was going to say book cover, but soon to be books. I know Anthony's working on one. But you can go right to horror, etc. yourself, horror.etc.com. If you love this, you are good, because this is basically a podcast. These guys are fantastic. Two of my best friends here in Kingston, and let's continue with the discussion of all things horrible. And let me just... Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Your mic's much better. I just had a couple of comments. And number one, Angela Black's favorite horror film is Carrie.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's the one that comes to mind.
So, Angela, let me ask you this: the new one, did you go see the new one?
I did see the new one. I'm kind of a diehard, a ridge there. I love my Sissy Spacek. I did see the new one. I think there's actually been 2 remakes, or at least a sequel and then a remake. So I'm not really sure, but no, that one, because of the age I was at the time, and the girl at the prom and the blood and everything. Oh God, it was. And Christine was another one. I love me some Stephen King. I always some pretty good films.
Guys, your comments on Christine?
And here I also see your mic sounds much better all of a sudden, Brent.
Oh, okay. It's probably me because I had a cup of coffee at the break, so.
Well, those 2 films, they...
We're having a great time, so congratulations on a great interview.
Yeah, Christine was a great horror film when you're dealing with a car, to make it scary.
Agreed.
And the girl that was in it looked just like my mother.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things, and one of the things that I do like about Christine, there's a specific sequence where the car itself is...
Can't hear you very well.
There's a specific sequence in Christine where the car is essentially rebuilding itself, and that sequence, as a technical achievement on film, is exceptional, especially considering that film was made in 1983, I believe.
Yes.
Carrie, the original Carrie, and I enjoyed the remake, Angela, to be honest. So if you get a chance to see it,
okay.
I actually did enjoy it. Stephen King films are hit and miss. On the big screen, Stephen King doesn't fare nearly as well as he does on television because you really often need that 2 or 3 part miniseries treatment to do justice to what he's presenting in his books, because he has got such a creative mind, and his approach to horror is very different than what anybody else does. But when you find a good Stephen King adaptation, as you do in the original Carrie and as you do in Christine, those films work so well because they're so different than anything else that you're going to see. We actually did a Stephen King show, Ted and I, a couple of years back, and I hadn't revisited some of these films in about 20 years, and I was surprised at how some of them really held up.
I think in part the reason why the miniseries presentations are stronger when it comes to Stephen King's works, and I'm a big fan of his written works. I have virtually his entire library. And I think that it's not really the visual presentation of Frights that Stephen King does so well. It's when he's on his game, it's the characters, and he develops them so well and makes them so real. And the best way to reach that point in the visual medium is through a larger canvas that the miniseries provides. The 90-minute runtime doesn't let you get into the meat of what Stephen King does in his written work. The miniseries is much more structured to do that. So I was just going to throw in, though, Christine and Carrie are 2/3 of the Stephen King C film trilogy, right? That kind of kicked off his big screen adaptation era. So you got Christine, you got Carrie, and you got Cujo. That all came within quick succession. Very different films all. Carrie, though, Brian De Palma is controversial, perhaps. I think that some people hold him in lower regard, but I think that Brian De Palma, in that era specifically, was really doing some great work, and that was a great melding of Stephen King's early written success. I mean, that story is strong, although simple. It's strongly written, and De Palma realized it very well on film. So Carrie is a great classic from 1977. Can we just give up on the entire construct of trying to tackle the history of genre?
Oh, sure, we can go anywhere. This is nice.
We can go anywhere?
Absolutely.
Then I just want to squeeze one more thought in here before I turn over the reins to Anthony. It has to do with, I threw out an H.P. Lovecraft quote at you, and the idea there was to get at the heart of what horror is.
Precisely.
It's about the unknown. Well, one other character chimed in on this, and it was Alfred Hitchcock. Now, although not technically a horror film director, he did dabble a couple times quite successfully, but he was the master of suspense, they called him. And he defined the difference between shock and suspense very well, and I think it's applicable to the horror genre. And it also kind of defines why I prefer one over the other. So just Alfred Hitchcock's description goes a little bit like this. He says, if you imagine a scene where you have a set of characters sat around a table, and maybe they're playing cards or discussing some mundane subject. That scene plays itself out through the course of its 4 or 5 minute running time until it concludes with a bomb exploding that was under the table. That's shock. So you're going along, you're being presented this very mundane material, then boom, you've got an explosion, shock. The adverse to that is suspense, wherein you, the audience, are let in on the fact that there's a ticking time bomb under the table. So that is revealed to you. Now you have the same conversations taking place with the same characters around the table for the same running time, but it takes on an entirely new aspect. Now you know that every moment that's ticking by has meaning, and it's ramping up towards an inevitable conclusion. That's suspense. So for me, I always prefer the latter of the two. Shock has its moments. There's a great short film that we just discovered here this week. It's called Lights Out.
Fantastic.
It does the shock moments very well in its 2-minute runtime form.
I haven't slept in 5 days since I've seen it.
Really? The occasional jump scare, when constructed fairly, is fun. But suspense is much more rewarding, I find.
Now, Teddy, I'm picturing Alfred Hitchcock's voice in my mind. Now, picture a group of people sitting around a table playing cards. And there's a ticking time bomb under the table. You know,
Look at you.
you know, I can just picture them.
Let you do that bit.
But
that
he
was
truly,
a great impression. An absolutely perfect impression.
It had a little bit of John Houseman in it as well.
Houseman, great actor, great. Boy, we could talk about all the greats tonight. But yeah, Hitchcock, of course, he understood. Hitchcock arguably never made a horror film. I wouldn't even consider Psycho to be a horror film, but he tells dark stories, and he uses horrific elements in those stories. But I think it's unfair that he's labeled as a horror filmmaker. I don't think he is a horror filmmaker. No.
But I find
some
it
of the
difficult to
scariest movies ever made were made by Hitchcock.
Yeah, arguably, yeah. Well, sure, Psycho is terrifying. The Birds is quite terrifying.
The Birds is a fun film.
It is.
I read that
Birds
as
is
satire.
fun.
Yeah,
I couldn't sleep as a kid.
No, that's satire. That's what that is. Yeah, but I think that it was a successful
You know,
approach to it.
if you've seen the movie, what would did they call it? The Girl, where they were talking basically. It was about Hitchcock casting, who was the woman in the Birds?
Tippi Hedren.
Tippi Hedren, yeah. And I don't know if you've seen that movie, but the scene where they shot the birds, flying all around her. She had to shoot that thing X amount of times. That scene, I mean, just 30 times, 40 times, something like that. The poor thing was just horrified by the end of it all. And I mean, literally horrified. I mean, she was so exhausted, and I mean, I can't even imagine all these birds flying at me at all times. So he definitely got his shot, in all those, in his all those takes, etc. And that was the movie I was going to bring up as a horror movie. So you're comparing suspense to horror, and I think that's a very interesting point. We're discerning between suspense and horror, and I just found it very interesting because I guess I didn't give it a lot of thought before this conversation. So nicely done.
One film I thought was very suspenseful was Steven Spielberg's first movie, The Duel, where
I've never heard of that.
You have the guy in the 18-wheeler that's behind him, menacing him all the way down the road, and you can just feel, Dennis Weaver, I think, is the actor, just sweating bullets. Trying to get out of the way of this 18-wheeler that's coming after him, and he never, he pulls in for gas, and you just see this guy get out of the 18-wheeler, and you just see his boots and his pants, and you never see his face, and then they're back at it again. I thought that was done, a chase scene like that, but that was the entire movie, but done very, very well.
Now, what's really interesting about that, Bill? I believe that was originally shot as a television film, and it was so successful at the time, where it was perceived to be so well made by a young up and coming director by the name of Steven Spielberg, that it actually ended up getting a theatrical release. And you're right, that's a perfect example of the element of I think it's wonderful. Stephen King does this too, to take something so mundane and make that mundane part of everyday life, like driving on the highway and passing traffic or birds or stopping in a motel, to take something that's so mundane that we do encounter day to day and then turn it into something horrific. That's where true horror comes from. The idea. I love a haunted house movie. Haunted house films are my favorite types of films, and we all have to live somewhere. So the idea that our home, our sanctity, our fortress, sanctuary. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Our sanctuary, can be corrupted. The corruption of innocence, or the corruption of those day-to-day elements of our lives. That's true horror. I'm not a big fan. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I said. Did you ever recall the movie House on Haunted Hill? It came out in like 1962, 61.
And then they did it again in
of course,
the original one, House on Haunted Hill.
Yeah, William Castle film, of course, with Vincent Price, which again is another wonderful film. It's fallen into the public domain, so it's one of those films that somebody listening right now, if you've never seen The House on Haunted Hill, go on to archive.org or go on to YouTube, and you can watch it there because it's in the public domain. But yeah, that's a great film. It's a roller coaster.
So when I was 10 years old watching that was a scary film, and it was everyone was riveted to it, and you went to school the next morning. Everyone was going, "Oh, did you see that movie? Did you see that movie?" So.
But here's the thing. Something that I love about that type of film, and I mean, I'm an aficionado. I grew up during the slasher era, but I grew up on the Universal films and the Hammer films, because those movies, like the William Castle films or the Roger Corman films, those movies were fun. And when you leave the theater, you know that you're safe from the boogeyman. The boogeyman's not going to come get you. You had a good time. It was fun. Vincent Price was up there hamming it up on screen. He had a twinkle in his eye. Everything was tongue in cheek. Horror was safe. Horror was entertaining. Now, today, when I see films like Hostel or some of the later in the Saw series, or films that are so have such a fixation on cruelty and evisceration and that whole torture porn industry, as they call it, when horror ceases to be fun, I cease to enjoy it.
Yes,
I wanted to tell you something. I grew up with
I agree, by the way.
The Universal film. I'm 62. I grew up with the Universal films, the Abbott Costello and all that. But I had told Brent this a week ago or so. Bela Lugosi's estate sued Universal for infringement on his likeness, right of privacy, because after he died, he had created Dracula in his way, and they put his picture over on a bunch of memorabilia, they were selling it in all the stores and everything, and they sued Universal, and it was the first huge case like this. And the California Supreme Court came down and said that Bela Lugosi was an employee of Universal, and Universal could take whatever they wanted to take and didn't owe him a thing. So I wanted to throw that out as a background, because you were talking about all the great Universal films, which they were, but that's just a little offshoot of some legal history.
It's interesting. I was just chatting with somebody last night about this, because the great holy grail of that era. So much of Universal's history. Universal really did create the modern horror genre, and that started in 1923 with The Hunchback. But a lot of that era has is lost for all time. Like London After Midnight is a Lon Chaney Sr. film that is thought to be lost for all time. Although there's rumors that somebody does have a print somewhere, and it's just a matter of money right now. But I was talking with somebody about the great holy grails of film last night, and back in 1931, just after he finished shooting Dracula, Lugosi screen tested with Jack Pierce makeup. He screen tested for Frankenstein. He was going to do Frankenstein. Now, Lugosi claims that he walked, or the story is that he walked from the production because he didn't want his face to be covered up by the makeup. But in truth, he was deemed inappropriate for the role because he just wasn't the right actor for that part. There was a screen test shot of Lugosi in makeup that's different from what Karloff ended up wearing, and it disappeared in the 1950s, never to be seen again. And out there somewhere, I would love to see that. For me, is the holy grail
That's an interesting
of classic. Yeah.
If that was ever What's funny, though, it is lost and has not been seen by an audience.
1960-something was the last time, yeah.
But I think that there is an image associated with that movie that is very widely recognizable, and it's Chaney's face front and center in a beaver skin hat and those fangs for teeth. He's got those round eyes, and I think that image is so indelible to that film. I see that as the holy grail of lost films.
Sure, sure.
Okay, let me ask Ted this, and this is going to include Anthony in a way. Anthony's just done a remake of Phantom of the Opera. Now, you like to go see horror films a lot. What would draw you to go see a remake of a movie, Ted? And in particular, what would draw you?
A remake of a movie?
Yeah.
Well, that's a difficult question because for me, it's not about remakes. Oh God, you've chosen all the subjects tonight that are like the landmines in the field of my horror conversation. Remakes are a tough business. I don't really have an animosity toward remakes. There is, I think, that certain films should be held in such high regard that they are above redoing them. It's a truth of the world we live in that properties and brands have value, and name recognition generates a certain box office response. So you do it. You remake a film, and sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. What I go to a remake for is not necessarily to see all those particular moments, recognizable things that I appreciate from the original, recreated. I want to see a different twist, a different spin, a different approach, something unique.
Let me pose this to Anthony then. What made you want to redo Phantom of the Opera? This is a classic of all time.
Well, it is. But now let's not forget that this is the most recent in a series of adaptations of classic literature that I've done. I mean, these are. I'm a storyteller. I'm an actor. For those people, well, thank you. That has yet to be determined. But this didn't start. This didn't start recently. I mean, when I was a kid, this is when VHS was just starting to explode. You couldn't, at least where I was living in Canada, you couldn't get your hands on the classic horror films. So I would read about these movies like Lugosi's Dracula or Karloff's Frankenstein or the Hammer films. And what I would do is I would actually get a video camera or get kids together in my neighborhood and actually do my own adaptations of these films based on what I thought they looked like. And and then that turned into the same type of thing on stage. I would do the classic stories, and then on radio.
So you get kids in the neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm thinking your mother was going to get a lot of phone calls then about you.
My mother probably did, but she was too busy watching The Exorcist or playing Trivial Pursuit to take heed to it. But listen, I'm a storyteller. I'm an actor. I love playing certain characters. I make films in the air, the vein of Yes. This was an adaptation of Stoker's Dracula. And I set out to be as faithful an adaptation as I could. It's called Terror of Dracula, and we actually shot it to look like a 1970s era Hammer film. I gave it the 70s grain and everything. We shot it. I played Dracula in this thing. And when it was done, Bill Bossert, who produced it, and I printed 1,500 copies of the DVD, and we thought, okay, we'll sell it and, do conventions, yada, yada, yada. We actually had to pull those DVDs after 2 weeks because it's the first film produced locally in Kingstown, Ontario, which is where I'm based, to actually score a deal with a Hollywood-based distributor. We're out with Reality Entertainment. That film is on DVD and video on demand all over North America and beyond. Oh, well, no one says we're making money with it, but it's out there anyway, And that led to Ghost Keepers, which is a film in which I play a washed-up horror actor, so I hope that's not foreshadowing. There's a Sherlock, thank you very much. There's a Sherlock Holmes film I shot prior to Dracula, which was just picked up by the distributor. I saw the trailer for the first time yesterday. That's going out, and that's going to be everywhere in August. But Phantom of the Opera is one of those stories that I wanted to tell in my own voice. It's a very different adaptation, but I love the musical. I love the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Ted does too.
Let me ask you this then, Anthony.
Yeah.
You've got a whole audience listening right now. Why should they come and see your adaptation? Tell Ted, and I want Ted to ask questions.
Well, it's different.
Why would I watch your movie?
Why would you? Why would you? Because he can't think of an excuse quick enough, so we stuck there tomorrow night. Listen, I love the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical very much. I've seen it 8 times. I just traveled down to the States to see it last week. But I also love the history of Phantom of the Opera on film, like the 1943 Claude Rains film or the 62 Herbert Lom film. These are great movies. The Robert Englund film from 1989, grossly underrated, wonderful film. So our Phantom of the Opera is very much inspired by the history of Phantom on film and the original novel, because it was a novel first in 1911 by Gaston Leroux, more so than the sappy musical that's so popular. So why? Oh, it is sappy. I felt that I wouldn't have done the film if I didn't feel that there was room to do something different with it, because there's no point in retreading, because you're only going to be compared to the history of it. So we did shoot it. It's got distributed well, and I hope that it brings people back to the original novel, because that original novel is a wonderful thriller. It's a wonderful suspense. The love story is actually very much relegated to the to the periphery. It's really about. It's a very scary story.
Let me ask Ted. Ted, if you went to see this film, what are some of those classic things from the original film that you would be expecting to see and would be disappointed if they weren't in?
Oh, God. Put me on the spot.
Yes, Ted, do tell.
Yeah, and that is a big if, Anthony. The layer. I'm curious to see how you approach the layer. Did you take on the layer in this production?
Yeah, of course we took on the layer.
So that would be a curiosity of mine, because, it's always a challenge. I mean, this is it's an exorbitant undertaking to try to recreate something like that. And so it's always a question of how far can you and will you go? And that's something that I'm interested in.
Well, that's actually...
Secondly, though...
Sure, go ahead.
This is the mask.
Yes.
The mask is the thing.
Yes, the mask is the thing.
Almost every adaptation makes its own attempt at creating the mask in its own unique way.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you have your own presentation of the mask.
I do. It's never been done before. Never been done. That's
very cool.
I'm actually quite pleased. We've gone with kind of like a Venetian mask, which is very, very threatening. I want to say something. You mentioned about how to take on something like this. We had to find, or when I say we, I mean I and my multiple personalities, had to find a unique way to tell the story that would work with our budget, and also we're doing a story like the Opera. It has to be set in period, because if you set it in present day, are you telling me in 2014 a police crew can't find some guy in a mask and a cape hiding out in a basement in a theater somewhere? No, it doesn't work. But if you shoot it in period, then at some point you're going to have to show an opera performance. You're going to need to have 300 or 400 or 500 people, extras clothed in correct period attire. I couldn't do that. So what I was able to do is find a balance, dividing it between present day and the past, and tying it all together, and actually for the first time ever attempting to tell Phantom of the Opera as a legitimate ghost story. So the setup for people who might be curious, it starts off in present day with a reality television series coming through, a paranormal TV program. You've seen these, because I'm a theater guy. Every old theater I've ever played has a ghost story. And so this particular theater that they're doing a documentary on, they're doing a documentary on the legend of the Phantom of the Opera, who's the ghost who used to haunt this. Theaters and communities now, like here in Kingston, we have a grand theater. Theaters 100 years ago were actually called opera houses. So, so it's not a fallacy to call it an opera house, and they all have their own opera companies. So what happens is this paranormal reality series comes in, they do their thing. One of the young ladies who's part of the crew starts having these flashbacks to the 1930s. So where the story of the Phantom of the Opera as we know it unfolds, and everything kind of comes to a head in present day at the masked ball. And I'm very proud of the way that we skirted that. And the modern stuff is shot in very, very freehand HD color. And all the 1930s material is actually shot in glorious black and white. That was important too. So I'm marrying the history of Phantom on film and the book, and also the human angle of the or that that human spirit angle of the musical. It's all in here. But I'm trying to tell the story as realistically as I can. What would the Phantom Slayer really look like? What would be what would be the mindset there? It's not just a demented genius at an organ. There's a mindset there. What has propelled him to do this, and what are the repercussions for having to adopt this lifestyle? So a lot of thought went into this. It was one of those babies that I've always wanted to do. And if you ask any woman who's ever dated me, I do look fantastic behind a mask.
Folks, the film is actually brilliant. I spent the better part of 6 weeks with it, scoring it, and it scared me so much one night when I was writing this particular scene, and I don't want to give it away, but it's kind of not a devil worship scene, but in my mind it was. because everybody needs views. And it scared me so much I turned the stuff off and went to bed. And that's a true story.
You know, Brent, I appreciate you very much. You've thrown a lot of love at this, and you've been a fantastic supporter, and believe me, that's appreciated. But I have to throw it back to you as well, because, ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman who hosts this program, Brent Holland, not only is he a competent and talented broadcaster, but he's also an amazing musician. And a lot of people talk. You know, a lot of people talk. A lot of people say they've done this, they've done that, or, you know, I can do this, or, hey, that's no problem. And, you know, but a lot of times, the majority of the times, it's all talk. And humbled, actually, to discover that Brent Holland is the real deal. He has worked professionally as a composer. He creates fantastic music. And Brent asked what I wanted for Phantom of the Opera. I said I wanted an old-fashioned Hammer-style score. And it blew my mind. It blew my producer's mind when you delivered that. And well, you're very welcome. Thank you. And so much of the reason why this particular film works, and test audiences have actually said this, is because of the music.
Thank you.
So
that's very kind. You know what this means, folks? The post-show beer is going to be paid by me.
Pay up, buddy.
I see it coming. Ted's smiling right now because he knows he's going to get a free beer out of it too. Ted?
Sure.
What, again, going back to Phantom of the Opera or any classic horror film, if you had the director sitting right in front of you, as you do now, Anthony D.P. Mann, what would you ask him? What would you demand from him? I want to see this, I want to see this, I want to see this. If I'm going to lay out the bucks to go see this movie...
Well, this sounds like a question you've already thrown at me. I struggled with a few elements. The problem is that I am well aware that Anthony's approach is unique.
Yeah.
So with that, of course, there's going to be certain aspects of this original story that I can't have expectations of. So, you know, having the full opera house, having the ballroom sequence, having all these things happen would be great. I have no expectations whatsoever because I don't know what was pulled off.
It's best if you go in with the lowest of expectations, Ted, you know, and build from there. Build from there.
That's what they say. But if I could just throw at this one thought here with talking about the classic era of horror, the birth of the genre from, you know, its European roots into North America, Phantom of the Opera launching in 1925. I meant to ask you, Anthony, Maximilian Schell's version.
Yes.
Year was 1983.
1983,
so 1 year off. I was bugging me this whole time. Either way, we should declare that your favorite version is?
My favorite version is actually the Robert Englund film.
Yes,
I love the Robert
enough.
Englund film, 1989.
Oddly enough. Another one that sort of plays with the time travel aspect.
Actually, you know, I just literally last night I found it's been released on Blu-ray in Germany. I have the DVD, but I want the Blu-ray. It's on its way to me. Das Phantom der Oper. It's got the English track, I hope.
I equate, and this is a little metaphor that I would use for a lot of those classic films of yesteryear, Universal Era, the Nosferatus of the world, and et al.
Oh, yeah.
I equate this stuff to the foundations of these are, you know, you have to have certain keystones in place in order to construct upon them, right? And I don't equate it to just any California known as the Winchester House.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, it's a crazy place.
Now, Angela and Vern, you're both in Bill, you're both in Nevada. Oh, now is that anywhere new? Have you been to the Winchester House?
You still there, guys? No, I don't think they're there anymore.
The Winchester House is this winding kind of impossible building that was constructed over decades in order to stave off the spirits of those that died at with the use of the guns that they built.
I would love to see this thing.
I want to go to the Winchester House, but I mean, any documentary you see, anything that you, any clip that you see of this place, it gives you a visual representation of these corridors that go nowhere, these staircases that lead to nothing, and all these twists and turns, and yet it's impossible, but yet it's all structurally sound. So having these classic horror films of yesteryear, formulating the foundation of your building, allows you a solid base upon which you can go in any direction. You can go into any place, you can explore any avenue that your imagination will allow you, but you will always have this strong foundation that's been built. And that's why I personally appreciate the classic era of horror, the black and whites of yesteryear.
We haven't even talked about the Hammer films yet.
You know, we didn't
That's
even
another
get
show.
out of the
That's another
30s.
show,
So
Yeah, that sounds.
When Brent said to me, we're going to do the history of horror, I shook my head. I said, I don't see it. But it was a good start.
It was just like diving in Lake Ontario. It might be a while before you get to the other side. Right?
That's right. You know, there is actually a film about Winchester House. It's called The Haunting of Winchester House. It's an asylum movie.
Oh, no.
The house is wrong, but the film's decent. The film's decent.
I was in the Whaley House. Have you heard about that? The Haunting of the Whaley House?
Yeah. Oh, Whaley House. Yeah, that's right. That's another asylum film.
In there.
Did you really?
I'll show you some of the footage. Anyways, folks, we're going to have to start to wrap up.
Oh, dear.
Looking at the time. Oh, no, we still got 6 minutes, guys. Okay, Anthony, you had posted on Facebook, horror-etc.com, by the way, folks, and there is a group on Facebook, Horror Etc. I think you just search for that, and then you can become a group member. Is that the way it works, I think?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Horror Etc. podcast on Facebook.
Okay, so there you go, folks.
All individuals welcome.
And you know what? If you've enjoyed these guys, man, are you going to love the podcast?
No, I'll throw this out because I do try, because I mean the podcast is such a, it's been a labor of love, more than anything by this gentleman here to my right, by Ted, because he really does he works his posterior off to make sure the show sounds great every week, and I just show up and add some fluff and that's it. But it's been a team effort.
You look great behind a mask.
I do. Absolutely. Yeah, you've heard that line before, haven't you?
And I have the perfect body for radio. I'll have you know.
I do try and keep the whole film stuff and the self promotion separate from that. So I'll throw it out. If anybody's interested in the films, check out AnthonyDPMan.com. That's my website, www.anthonydpman.com, to see what I've been up to. But I mean, certainly Horror Etc. It's been a joy to do it with Ted for 6.5, almost 7 years, and I've never enjoyed the show as much as I have in the past year, to be honest. And it's opened so many doors.
And you know what? One of the most important things happened to me, folks, when I was on Kingstown. Ted was kind enough when I first moved in beside him. I'm his neighbor, to invite me on the show, and Kelly Lowe stepped forward from Alaska, and he puts together all my websites.
Yeah, Kelly's a great guy. Yeah,
fantastic. My iTunes. I can't say enough, Kelly. Man, I owe you from the bottom of my heart. And hopefully one day I'll be making money and be able to pay you back in dividends. I really hope that'll happen. Anthony, you posted on Facebook that you are most undecidedly sure about the future. Yeah. And I'm here to tell you, suck it up.
Yeah, I know.
Let's go. Let's
Absolutely.
go, buddy. You've got way too much to offer the world. You've got your own voice, and
well, it all comes down. It all comes down to the buck. Trying to find backing for the next couple of projects. I want to keep this going. There's momentum going. Fangoria's been very kind, and a lot of doors are opening. But I recently walked away from a deal that would have seen me get my next 5 films funded. And in the spirit of actually remaining. Sticking to the integrity of myself as an artist.
People want to become involved with your films. They want to help support you financially. How would they do that?
Well, listen, we're always looking for people to get involved, looking for investors, looking for backers, looking for producers. Get in touch. Check out the website. Yeah, AnthonyDPMan.com. Take a look, see what we're doing, and if you want to get involved in creating, they say that they don't make films like they used to. Well, we actually are making films like they used to.
Get ready to have the Easter stuff.
Support the art. Yeah.
This film is fabulous. It really
well, you're too kind.
Will scare the bejesus out of you without question. What's next for Kingstown Ted, Anthony D.P. Mann, and Horror Etc.? What's
beer? I think beer.
I think beer.
I think beer's next.
I think at the Mansion. I'm thinking the Mansion. By the way, Mansion, there's a plug for you with all our listeners.
Send them a bill.
We got 3 minutes left. Is there anything you guys want to?
I have one final closing thought. I meant to make my metaphor analogy there, my closing thought, because I thought it was pretty clever, don't you?
Absolutely.
Huh? Yeah, I do.
Just a house with some words, I like this stuff. That was good. That was right off the cuff.
But can you do it as Alfred Hitchcock?
Well, no.
Imagine, if you will, a house made of horror.
No, we can't get out of here until you give us the Christopher Lee delivery.
The Christopher Lee delivery.
Please.
Imagine, if you will, a house made out of horror.
There it is. So my closing thought would be, terrible. You mentioned Kelly. Kelly's a listener to the Horror Center podcast. He reaches out to you through affiliation, being on the show. And the point I want to make is the horror genre is a unique subset of people, And I've found, my experience in doing the podcast and interacting and feedback and all that great stuff is that I don't think that there's a better group of people out there. The horror genre fans truly are great. And we've seen it firsthand. Yeah. So... we really appreciate the support, and support my friend here, Anthony Mann. Check out
Oh,
his new
thank
film.
you. You know, listen, the horror fans, we're an army of misfits that have united across this little thing called the World Wide Web, and there is strength in numbers, and we are showing that to be that misfit is to be cool. Strange is normal. That's what our distributor says, and I couldn't possibly agree more.
And folks, as you all know, in a parting, you know, you can find all our contact information for COM. I will always say and maintain, if it takes the whole world sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories to get us to stop shooting each other's butts off, then for God's sake, let it happen and start tonight. Folks, send me your ghost stories. Send me all your stories. www.nightfrightshow.com. Anthony and Ted have been my guests tonight. Kingstown Ted, horror.etc.com. Go ahead, Anthony.
Does this mean we can put our pants back on now? I thought that was strange,
no,
but
you know
what?
that's okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
That's okay. We're all going to.
So pants off then.
Off then.
Yeah.
Sticking with the, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the way we do things in Canada.
I've never
That's the
done
way
this
we
before.
roll in Canada.
Strange.
The colder out it is, the more clothes we take off. Just be glad if you're getting a visual that it's not minus 23 out right now and it's above zero, because then we'd be naked. And there's three men here sitting here in our underwear. So there we go.
Hating to cut this short.
And it seems to be colder on that side of the room for some reason than it is on this side. Folks, I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. I'm so happy this show went off. I've had an absolute blast. You know, sometimes from chaos comes some good things, and this is what has taken place tonight. It's just been an absolute pleasure to have you guys on the show. And you're not going to be strangers. You're not getting
Coming back, yeah.
Got to come back. I mean, we have
Enjoyed the show very much. Bill had to go outside and get the cats, but we very much enjoyed the show as well.
Take
Oh,
care,
hey,
Angela.
wonderful. Good.
Plug your show
Thank
right
you.
away, sweetie.